Much, Fizza. It's my privilege to be here, Agha Sahab. Thank you very much for the invitation. Thank you. Agha Sahab, I grew up in a family in which the launch of a book has always been congratulated in the same way as the birth of a child. So my sincere congratulations to you and also the family. I have been asked to speak about the book and the ideas in the book from the perspective, from the lens of agriculture, the sector, Pakistan's agriculture sector, which I have worked in for some time. Agha Sahab, you talked about 18th century feudal mindset. In going through the book, I was thinking about actually a 17th century example that's very similar to what we have, and all of you might consider it in the context of the news reports we are going through these days with the wheat and sugar crises. Agha Sahab has written in the book that economics is a game and nothing more. And there's some games that have been played for, over and over and time and again. These centuries have passed as these games have been played. I would like to draw your attention to a personality from the 1660s called Shaista Khan. The man was an uncle of the Mughal Emperor Aurangzeb, and after that cataclysmic couple of years of warfare between the brothers, the sons of Shah Jahan, 1656 to 1658, he was given his role in supporting Aurangzeb. He was rewarded with a governorship, Subedar Banaya Gaya, of Bengal. And among the many things he did was become very distinguished in using the royal monopoly on the sale of salt. The collection and sale of salt was a royal monopoly. And he turned it into an example of, you might say, extortion presented as economics, extortion presented as commerce. You might find it familiar. The government sales of salt were made to traders who then sold to the general public. And Shaista Khan regularly forced these traders to, he dictated the prices that they had to buy this government salt at, and then pocketed the excess profits, which also caused inflation, made the salt more expensive. He is said to have amassed, in the 1600s, amassed some 38 crore rupees as his fortune, 380 million rupees in his lifetime. If you think this is an analogy for the wheat and sugar sectors, which I'll come to in a moment, it's not actually. It's an analogy for the wholesale grain markets of Pakistan, which are operating in similar ways with commission agents appointed by the government and the treasures made thereof. This is a couple of observations, I think, in the context of, as Fizza asked, how can the ideas in the book and the aspirations expressed in the book be converted to action and for benefit for the country and our people. Just a couple of points on agriculture. It's a sector that is usually considered a sort of backwater by economic decision makers and thinkers, but it actually happens to hold an enormous potential for the growth we are all looking for. And by growth, I mean, I'm taking a very simple definition of growth. Think of a person who makes 30,000 rupees a month. Over a lifetime, he grows his income to 300,000, 350,000 a month, and that's considered progress. It's in a very narrow view of economic progress for a family is they do better over a period of time, and in a very simple approach, that's economic growth as well. How much does a country have to sell? And the more that grows, the more there is left over for distribution among the public, etc., etc. And the yields in agriculture, specifically that means the production per acre, these yields for most of our crops are far below the best in the world and far below even the global average. And this represents a potential for growth which can be achieved with just a little bit of capital. All the requirements for investment in agriculture can all be financed within Pakistan. They are not like major power plants require billions of dollars or mining, etc. Agriculture does not require billions of dollars, it only requires billions of rupees. And there's some straightforward measures. But as Agha Sahib has said in his book, only those countries have transited, and I quote, only those countries have transited from decadence to prosperity that have clearly structured social and legal roles. They've relied on merit and also on research-based decision-making. Now, in that spirit, I would like to request you to consider agriculture from another perspective. Agriculture is also a sector. It's not just a sector which has great economic potential. It is also a sector that can contribute massively to poverty reduction. And here we must not forget the example of China and its unmatched achievement in poverty reduction, which we celebrate so much. It all started with agriculture. In 1978, if you look at the history of, you look at any chronicle of the history of China's economic growth and what Premier Deng Xiaoping started, it starts with what he introduced in agriculture in 1978 as a measure to allow farm families to sell any excess production beyond what the government would purchase from them, to sell it into the rural markets. And in China, the history of communism is such that the rural markets were not suppressed in China the way they were suppressed in the Soviet Union. So when the Soviets were trying to do that, or even after the Soviet Union fell, when they were trying to get rural economies to move, there were no markets to move them with. But China did not have that situation. And because of the food-starved economy of China in the late 70s, this created an enormous boom in agricultural production. And without very much intervention from the government or support from the government, farm families started to increase their output and sell on these markets. And so the story of poverty reduction in China, a lot of it in the early years, early couple of decades, I would say, in the 80s and 90s, is a rural story. And you may have heard about the movement of farm labor basically moving over to the cities of China over these decades, 1978 to the late 2000s. This is one of the largest peacetime migrations in history. And it is because the Chinese government focused on growth in agriculture as a way to reduce poverty. So my submission is to consider agriculture as a sector which not only has economic potential and has growth potential, but also as a sector that can reduce poverty. Now, in terms of some of the financial aspects of some of the proposals in the book, I think just a couple of observations. The sectors of our economy that can contribute the most to poverty reduction, that are critical to reducing poverty: education, health, and as I have argued, agriculture. These are sectors which are locked away from the mainstream financial markets of Pakistan, mainstream capital markets of Pakistan. The capital markets of Pakistan are completely connected, seamlessly connected to the power sector, seamlessly connected to even the sectors which are not contributing so much to poverty reduction. But in education, I'll give you a couple of examples. In education, the most expensive part of the education sector that costs the most to deliver its goods is the university education for creating professionals, and the country needs professionals. We don't have a student loans regime that can finance that sector of the section of the agriculture of the education sector and reduce the burden on the public sector, which can then focus on the most important public priority, which is primary education. In health, we have the government has in recent years started paying for insurance premiums for health policies for the poor, but this is again, the capital is coming from the government. We need a universal healthcare system that can support all the investments that are needed in expanding our healthcare sector. Only 25–30% of the population actually has access to reasonable healthcare. And similar is the case for the agriculture, where there's a very tenuous link with the financial markets. Mostly the farm machinery that's needed, funded by the government, the seed development, which is absolutely absolute paramount importance, again funded by the government. Wholesale markets, I think, are already mentioned. In conclusion, as Aga Sahab talked about, I think in the book, he writes extensively about the role of the public sector, about the bureaucracy, but the broader role of the public sector in the economy. And I think we have a sort of an abusive public-private partnership in many cases. And you see it in the news with the sugar millers, wheat millers. Somebody was saying at a recent event that sugar is a crop where farmers are extorted, etc., exploited. And the point I wanted to make was that every single crop they are exploited. So I think with those observations, I'd just like to congratulate Aga Saab again and thank you for your time.